Hello, welcome to The Stream. I'm Imran Garda and you are, of course, in The Stream. Today, as Muslims across the globe begin the feast of Eid al-Fitr, we look at how those in Somalia cope with famine. What more should the international community do to end the crisis there? As always, our digital producer Ahmed Shihabuddin is here looking out for your live feedback. We've got a lot of feedback today. Look forward to you taking us through that. Also joining us next to Ahmed on the couch is Arij Noor, who's a Somali-American researcher. Arij, since we are focusing on Somalia, I'm looking forward to your thoughts and you chiming in throughout the program. But just for us to get to know you a bit better, tell us a little bit about some of the work you've been doing in the past and some of the work you're doing right now.
Well, I am Somali-American. My parents both come from Somalia, and I was working for the Brookings Institution in Doha, specifically on Somalia and the Greater Horn of Africa, dealing with issues like piracy and al-Shabaab and that type of research, doing like policy work on the policy end of things. And I have been to Somalia. I went once when I was 17, about 10 years ago, and did some NGO work for a women's organization there. And I'm published on Somalia as well in terms of what the world can do to sort of remedy the myriad issues that the country faces. So it is a passion of mine and it's an area of expertise.
Yeah, myriad issues, definitely myriad. They're all interconnected. Look forward to your thoughts and how you can contribute to the discussion over the next 27 minutes or so. Now, of course, this is your show and we want you to be a part of it. You can tweet us with the hashtag AJStream, or you can post your comments and story ideas onto our Facebook page. And this is it, The Stream TV show. We want you to like it. So far, 7,018. I hope it can be much, much more after this show. So go to Facebook and like the page, and you can contribute as well.
My name is Aurora Ellis. I'm a blogger from Washington, D.C., and I'm in The Stream.
Now, many of you have been tweeting to us, asking us to cover Somalia. Well, the UN says the drought in the Horn of Africa is the worst unfolding humanitarian disaster in the world today. Famine has been declared in several Somali regions. Take a look at this video I'm going to show you, which is from the aid organization Islamic Relief, to give you an idea as to what's going on the ground there.
This morning, in an IDP camp in Mogadishu, Abdi and his wife Hindiya buried one of their children who died of measles. They've now lost 5 children in a space of 3 days to the same disease. 1-year-old Abdul Qadir is malnourished. His mother died. His grandmother, Mu'min, now takes care of him. She has 4 children of her own and is struggling to feed them all. She travelled from Lower Shabelle to come to Mogadishu. She now stays in this camp.
Now, there are hundreds of thousands of people with similar stories throughout Somalia and across the border as they flood into the neighboring countries to escape the crisis. Now, if you go back 20 years, Somalia faced a similar crisis when some 300,000 people starved to death. Then, as now, experts say the human devastation was avoidable. Now, of course, this is Eid al-Fitr. It's supposed to be a feast. And it's supposed to mark the end of Ramadan, which is celebrated by, of course, 1.5 billion Muslims. And the question is, where is the world's focus? And do the people of Somalia even feel as if it's Eid, as if it's a celebration, or do they feel they've been forgotten? It's a conversation that seems to be missing from the mainstream media, who may be suffering from what could be called famine fatigue. But many of you are having the conversation online. Well, joining us now to discuss the famine in Somalia is Al Jazeera's Director General, Waddah Khanfar. He has just visited the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya, where more than 440,000 people reside, all of those refugees, of course. Waddah, welcome to The Stream. It's a great pleasure having you on the show. If you could give us an idea as to what you saw and what you experienced in your 12 hours or so with those refugees.
all of us have been following the disaster that's happening in Somalia, the famine and the drought. We have seen that on our screens. We have reported that on Al Jazeera Arabic, on Al Jazeera English, and we have seen that on most of the international news networks. But what I experienced personally when I arrived there, that whatever we have seen on the screen does not really represent the kind of the mighty tragedy that is happening on the ground. I think the people there are suffering, and the crisis is complicated, and they feel that they have been ignored, and they have been not actually taken care of by anyone. I think that people have been abandoned for poverty and for hunger and for diseases and negligence. You know, when you are talking about a refugee camp of about 480,000 people living in certain kind of shacks where nothing actually. Today it was very windy and it was dusty and it was very hot. To spend a few hours there is really risky. What about living in that camp not only for a few days or a few weeks or a few months? We have met people who have been born there 21 years ago. 21 years ago, refugees who have been born there. We have seen about 200,000 kids who do not have schooling. Now we are talking not about a temporary period. Yes, it is true. During the last few months, the amount of refugees have increased tremendously because of the drought. But the crisis itself has generated a reality, disastrous reality, that in my opinion, if the international society and people do not take care of what's happening there, I think this is a ticking bomb, and this is a disaster that will have not only humanitarian consequences, but social, political, and even strategic consequences on the African Horn altogether.
Waddah, as the Director General of a major media organization, what is the responsibility of media? Is media's job merely to reflect the crisis and let the viewer make their decisions after that reflection, or is there a greater responsibility on the shoulders of the media?
Unfortunately, sometimes media networks have a bad habit of getting excited about a story for a certain time, and then after that started losing interest in it and focusing on another story. This short span attention that a lot of us have is actually very serious, and I think what we are trying to tell the world is this is a continuous tragedy that is taking place in front of our eyes, and we are appealing to all international networks, media organizations, journalists, to put this matter at the center of their interest, not only to get excited about it just a few days or a few weeks and after that leave and abandon it. I think it needs to be present at the center of our attention, and we need to put resources, and we need to deploy correspondents, and we need to establish much more than just mentioning it briefly in a few seconds or a few minutes in the news. This is something that not only affecting a generation of Somalis, about 4 million people, half of the population of Somalia actually officially have been under this state during the last 2 years, but it also will affect the whole region if people do not take care of what's happening there and intervene in order to stop this tragedy and to support people to transcend their life into much more decent human life that every one of us would like to see for himself and for his children.
Waddah, as you know, this show is about giving as many people voices and including them on the show. And one thing many people are asking about is the Arab League. Atif Abdurrahman on Facebook asks, why has the Arab League remained silent on the Somali crisis, especially since Somalia is, after all, part of the League? What's your take on this issue?
Unfortunately, I agree with him. The Arab League did not do much on Somalia. Not only the Arab League, most of the Arab countries didn't do much. I mean, when we saw the whole... By the way, I mean, you are talking now about 21 years of civil war in Somalia.
Right.
And during these 21 years, no one spent enough effort, continuous effort, serious effort to find a solution. And therefore, the Somalis have been abandoned for their fate. And what we see today is a result a cumulative result of this whole tragedy that happened 21 years ago. So yes, the Arab League didn't do much. Arab countries didn't do much. International society as well didn't do much. And I think international powers and United Nations, all these people are invited to find a way to stabilize Somalia and to develop the society in Somalia and to prevent this tragedy before our eyes. People got involved in bits and pieces, in parts of the picture, in calling people or classifying people on the ground. And then they took excuses of the presence of Al-Shabaab sometimes, the presence of fighting here and there, not to interfere. Why? Maybe it doesn't, the interest maybe at this moment in time for a lot of powers in the world is not to get involved, and therefore they leave it. But they are not taking into consideration that what's happening right in Somalia is not going to continue within the Somali borders. This might affect the whole region. And as you know, the piracy, for example, and many other things that are happening in the region are a result of the deterioration of the Somali situation.
Arij, I saw you nodding in agreement when Wadah said that the people that he met on the ground feel abandoned by the international, quote unquote, international community. Is that a feeling that's also reflected by Somalis in the diaspora, Somalis here in the United States as well? When they look at their country, they feel that nobody cares?
Absolutely. I think many of us feel that way. And I think the reasons are there. It's historical, especially after the U.S. intervention in the early 90s that led to what we saw earlier with Black Hawk Down and whatnot. I mean, there's been an international fatigue. You guys talk about famine fatigue. There's other types of fatigue going on in terms of trying to figure out Somalia's political situation, trying to sort of nip the bud of the issue from, a strategic point of view, or like deal with the structural problems. The fact of the matter is this famine is a horrific humanitarian disaster that has political dimensions, but an accountable government is probably the best long-term solution for the Somali population not to have to deal with starvation again. And these are things that have to be addressed. But in the immediate now, what needs to happen is more effective food security and food distribution.
And talking about food security and food distribution now, Wadah, I know that you were there just for a few hours, but from what you saw, did there seem to be some level of coordination, some level of working together from both the Kenyan authorities and the Somali authorities who are relying on this international aid coming in?
Let me just give you some simple facts about this camp. It's supposed to accommodate not more than 130, 140,000 people. Now it is accommodating up to almost 500,000. So you are talking about a huge pressure on the facilities there, you have huge pressure on anyone who's trying to do anything. But at the same time, the coordination is not enough. I have listened to many people who have been complaining about people bringing a lot of food, dumping the food, giving them food, but at the same time, everything else does not exist. There is no healthcare, there is no education, there is no running water, sanitary. Many other things do not exist. Even tools, even equipments to cook the food is not there. A lot of people are bringing even some kind of food that is not suitable for the diet, the stable diet of the Somalis themselves. So I'm afraid that the international society, of a lot of international aid organizations, just in order to do something, they have just brought a lot of material, they put it there, but at the same time, this is not sorting out the problem. It is actually giving a feeling, maybe a comfortable feeling to us that we are giving the Somalis something. But at the same time, this is not developing a methodology whereby the Somali refugees there are satisfied, or at least their basic needs are met. We have visited houses, not houses, we have visited shacks, the shacks, you see them on TV, they are in a situation where no human being actually can live in. These people have nothing. Literally inside that small space, they have nothing. They don't have anything to cook. They don't have fire even to cook the food, to do anything. Their children have not seen proper, food for the last maybe few months. I have seen today, we met families have been walking for 28 days in the desert, and their kids died on the road. And they had to abandon some kids who were completely sick for the sake of saving the more healthy people. So it is something beyond imagination. In my opinion, it needs proper international intervention in order to do something coordinated well coordinated, and to stop the sometimes conflicts that are happening on the ground and competition that might not be even healthy by some international aid organizations. Each one of them is trying to establish its own way of doing things. There is no enough coordination there, and I think people are complaining about the way that aid has been arriving to them.
Wadah, speaking about the way in which aid has been arriving, clearly during the month of Ramadan, people have said there's been an influx, more aid or more food aid than usual. On Twitter, Merit Al-Sayed is saying, the Arab Spring and the holy month of Ramadan heightened the sense of solidarity with other nations in crises all over the world. And we have another tweet from ElSal92 saying that even Palestinians who face their own humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip are raising money to help aid Somalia too. Do you think that there's going to be a fallout right after the month of Ramadan, or as the Arab uprisings, kind of fall into the backside of the news agenda?
I agree that a lot of people wanted during the month of Ramadan to send their charity and to participate. And I think we have seen today, while we are there, a lot of charitable organizations from Qatar, from Turkey, from Egypt, from the Gulf, many other countries actually have sent a lot of people. And people are distributing food, and they're establishing certain kind of locations where people can approach them and take the food and so on and so forth. But the size of the tragedy is much bigger than what anyone or these organizations could actually handle. So yes, might be after Ramadan, a lot of people might not continue the support. And at the same time, I'm afraid that even if they continue, this is not enough. This is not enough at all. I think the situation needs very serious attention, not only from charitable organizations and civil society groups, but also from the international society. It needs proper intervention from the international aid organizations to coordinate efforts in a proper manner and in partnership with the locals. Because I think the locals were complaining today also to us that they have not been consulted on many issues, and a lot of aid is coming. So they are, for example, bringing huge amount of food, giving it to certain families or to people through distributing, coupons. And people after that, they don't know what to do with the food, so they go and resell it for the sake of buying medicine, for the sake, of course, resell it almost with nothing. So it needs coordination, and it needs proper methodology where there is a balance of providing for the needs of these people, rather than just having a wave of support that ends and then people are left and abandoned again. Media is important. I think journalists should be located there. Journalists should not go examine the place for a few hours and leave. I think we need to have crews living there with the people, projecting real life as it happens, and try to actually question and examine the way that people are handling the aid in order to introduce it to the world and to enhance the situation. I'm afraid if we abandon these people, we are going to see much bigger tragedy in the next few months to come. And these people, by the way, who have been living there, they are not allowed to leave the camps. So they are living there, they can't go anywhere else. They are not going back because of the civil war, and they have no education. So what kind of generation we are going to see? What kind of results we are going to reap out of allocation if we don't have a proper way of handling the political and the economic and the long-term strategic development in the country?
Wadah, what you've painted is quite a gruesome reality, which seems to be almost a dystopian dungeon that has been forgotten by the world, and should be an embarrassment to all of us in the 21st century. Thank you very much for shedding some light on the situation and giving us feedback on your visit there. Wadah Khanfar, the Director General of Al Jazeera Network, joining us there from Nairobi. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Arij, I saw you almost had a lump in your throat while Wadah was very eloquently describing the situation on the ground, particularly the story of the fact that there's a sort of triage going on where people are they're almost letting the weak die out so that they can preserve the fittest from among them in this desperate situation. It's a very Hobbesian reality on the ground. It shouldn't be happening in this day and age, should it?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting to hear an eyewitness who's still there around the camp describe, because you can sort of see the magnitude of what he feels in his description. I think that anyone that's been watching the news sees what's been going on in terms of beds, full of people with cholera, holes cut out for people to go to the bathroom, parents saying that they've left their infants, in the desert. It's very disheartening.
I was just going to quickly say there's one tweet that I think really sums up kind of the point Wadah was trying to make. Sana Saeed saying, it's dire to recognize that the situation in Somalia are not new. The political unrest, the economic instability, and the famine, these are, it's a perpetual problem, and hopefully our next guest will be able to shed some light.
Let's introduce our next guest, because we've got about 4 minutes left on the TV show, and of course it will spill over into the post show. Joining us now via Skype is Abdi Ismail Samatar, a Somali-American academic and professor of geography at the University of Minnesota. Abdi, thank you very much. Welcome to the stream. I hope you've heard some of what preceded you on the program. What do you think? Do you think that this famine is man-made in the sense that the political reality and the political disaster on the ground has perpetuated the drought and created horrendous famine, which is causing the death of all these people?
I've been studying, Imran, this issue for about 25 years. And anybody who claims that this is a natural calamity just simply doesn't understand and know what they are talking about. There has been several droughts in the last 50 years in the history of this country, let alone the region of the Horn of Africa. During that period, there were two famines, the current one and the one that took place in 1992-93. In 1992-93, there was no drought. The rains were agronomically good. The harvests were ready to be harvested by the peasants in the countryside. And then, lo and behold, the war broke out. Warlords began to sort of chase peasants around, take their harvests, and then deny them access to food aid. And in that process, a famine was created, which took the lives of 300,000 people. Today's famine is almost identical, except that the trigger now is the drought, of course. So anybody who claims that the drought is the problem, that's not the issue. Somalis have lived with droughts for millennia, and they have developed mechanisms for dealing with this. But the war on terror, the warlords, the Al-Shabaab groups who have denied people the capacity to organize themselves, that's the ultimate cause of the famine.
If you've mentioned a few of the protagonists, and we could even go further back, Islamic courts, the Ethiopian invasion, we can go all the way back to the dictatorship of Siad Barre. Out of all of those protagonists, who would you blame the most?
I think there are two issues. Certainly the old regime, the dictatorship in the 1970s, 80s, gradually destroyed the capacity of the country to have a government of its own. Without a government, then the local populations are sort of in the middle of nowhere to do anything about themselves. So that's a major factor, but the Cold War was implicated in that. More recently, I think it's the war on terror. For instance, my own government here in the United States has stopped food shipments into the territories which Shabaab controls in order to sort of rein in Al-Shabaab and hand them in. But in the process, what the government of the United States did was to hold the population, 3.5 million people who lived under Al-Shabaab, as a hostage to that process. And it's that process of hostage taking which ultimately destroyed the capacity and produced the kind of a devastating famine that we are seeing today.
Excellent point that you make. Abdi, that's going to be my final question to you on the TV show. Stream.aljazeera.com is where you can watch us as we continue this conversation for another 10 to 15 minutes. So Abdi Ismail Samatar, stay with us. Just before we go, Arij, I'm going to thank you, and we'll continue in the post show. Ahmed, give us some feedback just before we actually leave.
Well, on that point, this is one tweet from Ternafi saying the famine in Somalia has nothing to do with the drought. It's an outcome of U.S. destructive intervention via Ethiopia in the country. So perhaps nothing to do with the drought, but highlighting again the issue of foreign intervention.
Okay, we're going to look at these myriad issues and broaden them out, try to look at as many strands as we can in the post show. Stream.aljazeera.com. Don't forget, there's where you can watch us continue the conversation. If you're watching on TV, we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Welcome back. Great to have you with us on the post show. Stream.aljazeera.com is where, of course, you are watching us, and we hope you've been as engrossed by this as we have. We had the Director General of Al Jazeera, Waddah Khanfar, a little bit earlier on, painting a harrowing, horrible situation on the ground, which was in the Dadaab refugee camp, which was across the Somali border into Kenya. And it seems as if for the refugees, you know, it's almost out of the frying pan and into the fire for many of them. Arij, you've heard Waddah, and you've also heard of what Abdi Ismail Samatar has had to say. What are your reflections?
I think that essentially what I'm thinking mostly right now in terms of what Abdi just said is we did need that kind of a clarification about a drought does not necessarily mean a famine. And this is a lot more complicated than environmental factors. I think what happens when you start to take a look at the multiple actors that are involved in how we got here right now and how it got this severe in 2011, that's another question in terms of who you want to blame. If you want to engage in the blame game, there are many different ways you could go about that. Me personally, I'm more interested in seeing a more effective mechanism in place for the international community to distribute food. I think that President Obama earlier this month relaxing the State Department's policy on, you know, not supporting U.S. groups going in there and providing aid in Shabab-controlled areas. I think the relaxation of that policy has been excellent. I think that we'll see a lot of good come from that. I want to see more steps like that taken by the international community that are decisive and have definite impact in the near future. But at the same time, you can't separate that from a conversation about what the future of the transitional federal government and Al-Shabaab in Somalia is.
Yeah. Ahmed, I'm interested to see you actually take some of the feedback we've been getting on Twitter and maybe throw some of it to Abdi, who's still with us in the post show. Go ahead, Ahmed.
Abdi, if you can hear, you know, you spoke a little bit about international intervention, but on the way the show ended, you mentioned the ICU and how far you can take this back in terms of placing the blame. We see R3DPI11 on Twitter, that user is saying, when talking about Somalia, how can we not talk about the role of the ICU and the impact of international intervention against them? And
oh, I think we've just lost him for the moment, but I think he can still hear us, so hopefully when he
unfortunately
when he comes
can't.
back, yeah. Hopefully when he comes back, we can ask him that again. We'll take this. You know, I suppose that's a fair question, and it would have been. It's something that is an elephant in the cupboard,
right?
Because the Islamic Courts Union,
right,
for whatever those people, you know, for those people who didn't like it and were opposed to it, whatever they may say, a lot of Somalis have told me, and I remember we covered this extensively in the news. They said that they brought stability.
Absolutely.
They weren't given the time or space to stand on their own 2 feet to see how they could actually govern in the long term. They were, you know, immediately branded terrorists, and there was a US-backed Ethiopian invasion. Abdi is back now. So if you can hear me, there was a tweet from, who was it, Ahmed?
It's this R3DPI11, a long name there, but he, Abdi, you know, he was just talking about how you must discuss the role of the ICU in bringing about a relative stability, but also the impact of international intervention, as Imran just said, in 2006 during the Ethiopian invasion. How central a role does that play, you know, decades later or many years later?
Well, I mean, in 2006, actually, I spent a bit of time in Mogadishu and debated with the courts and their leaders. And what was quite clear was that they were not prepared for what they were able to achieve in large measure because the people were fed up of the warlords and decided to support these individuals, court members who were chased around by the warlords at the behest of the United States Central Intelligence Agency. What I saw in Mogadishu and in many neighborhoods outside Mogadishu and in different parts of the region is a relative calmness in which people began to go about their lives. And everybody was looking to Mogadishu for guidance, including some of the people in the north and the northeast of the country, the so-called Puntland and Somaliland. So and I tried to actually become a bridge between the United States government and the courts. Unfortunately, the US government was completely ideologically driven in terms of its policy and was not interested. All they were interested is the presumption that there were 3 terrorists who were responsible or partly responsible for the bombings of the embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam in 1998. And that's all they wanted to see.
That's
and I
interesting
tried
that
to convince them.
That's interesting that you say that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, because then you had a split, and it seemed as if the only palatable leader at that time of the ICU was Sheikh Sharif for the United States and for others. He left them. Do you think that once that happened and Al-Shabaab started emerging from the remnants of the ICU and others, that all hope was gone of any sort of conciliation, reconciliation, given all the international pressures on the Somali factions?
I think Sheikh Sharif, as he's labeled as a moderate, and there's nothing particularly moderate about him in my assessment, because he has let his people down, and that's the ultimate radicalism by starving your own people. But what was quite interesting was I met with him in Asmara, for instance, shortly before he moved to Djibouti, and then he called me from Djibouti just before he became president. And I remember clearly telling him that if he goes to Mogadishu claiming to be president, without the support of the foot soldiers who drove the Ethiopians out, primarily Al-Shabaab and others, then he will be left in the hole, much like Abdullahi Yusuf, and will control a very small sort of a mile or and a half in Mogadishu. He was oblivious to this because he thought the United States was behind him. He was the president of the country, and he ignored everybody, including the foot soldiers, who paid the ultimate price to chase the Ethiopians out. So in my assessment, there was a great deal. If he stopped before he became president, went to Mogadishu, talked with the young soldiers, some of them I have been able to negotiate with and talk with, I think there was an excellent chance. But because of the fact that he felt that now he had the ball in his court because the United States was supporting him, that's all he thought he needed, rather than needing the Somali people to bolster his legitimacy. And that's where the breakdown took place.
Abdi, we have many people making correlations or referencing on Facebook, for example, that the Arab League and others were supposed to help Somalia, through humanitarian intervention, but they're raising, billions of dollars to the NTC in Libya at the end of, in the face of their crisis. So many people are wondering, why do you think that, Somalia, maybe despite their situation, which is quite dire, is getting only millions, but Libya is getting billions? I mean, is it even worth discussing these points?
I think it's relevant because Somalia is officially a member of the Arab League, but it's also a Muslim country, so it's part of the Islamic Conference. The tragedy is that for whatever reason, partly Somali, partly because of the others, that the Islamic world and the Arab world never paid a significant attention. Somalia was always the short link or the weak link in this bridge. And so there is no oil. The strategy, Libya has oil better than any other oil in the Middle East. That's very close to the European shores. And that's where the new post-colonial project is about, in sort of a beheading Gaddafi and then trying to capitalize by the Europeans and NATO on this matter. So Somalia is the sort of a weak, poor child of the Islamic world and the Arab world. And shame on them, in my opinion, that in Islam and in the Arab culture, you come to your brother's rescue and you are your brother's keeper. But the Arab governments, that is, and the Islamic governments have looked the other way when it was convenient.
Abdi, just for the sake of our viewers, I want to inform them that you founded the Hill Quran Party, if I've said it correctly. I hope I did. So I mean, you have a political hat as well. You don't believe the transitional federal government is doing the job correctly. What would your party do differently? And do I dare ask, is there even, given all the chaos and anarchy on the ground, is there even the political space with all of this anarchy going on for there to be political opposition that can be of any value?
First of all, I was not alone in forming the party. There's a whole group of Somalis, including the most famous and the most respected former Somali Prime Minister, Mr. Hussein, who lives in the United States. And so there's a whole group of Somalis. We have an office in Mogadishu that's operating on the ground. So I think that our project is, first of all, to mobilize the local population rather than be sort of backed by somebody else from outside, because that project of backing from outside has failed miserable, because then you have to serve your masters elsewhere. Our masters are the Somali people. Our project is to mobilize that population. If the transitional government does something good and useful for the Somali people, we'll be more than happy to support it. But it hasn't done so, and that's why we have created the party. And we have offices not only in Mogadishu, but a number of other places. And we expect that mobilization to sort of move forward in a significant way over the next 6-7 months.
Abdi, on Twitter, we have James Dahl saying the TFG cannot be trusted with any money. The TFG is the most corrupt government on earth. Their soldiers steal food aid, and many other tweets, including another one where a direct question to you from Dalbas saying, if you're there, because we had lost you earlier, he wants to ask you the looting of militia for the aid. How do you think the Somali government should deal with that? Just quickly.
I think, first of all, I think the food should not be going to Mogadishu primarily. I think it should be going to the villages and the hamlets across the country, so that whatever population that's still left there can stay in their homes, so that as the rains come, literally as we are speaking, they can gradually go back to work to sort of rebuild their lives. That's the first thing. The transitional government, whether it's under Sheikh Sharif or whether it was under Abdullahi Yusuf or whether it was the transitional government before that, has failed to demonstrate any moral and ethical fiber in themselves in trying to provide for the desperate people who are both their own, who are Muslims, who are Somalis. And so my assessment is that rebuilding a national security force, whether it's a police or a military defense, has to be completely professional and independent from the TFG, much like the political project post-transition has to be. In my opinion, I think James is absolutely right, that whatever little money that has gone to the TFG has been squandered. And until literally the United Nations declared the famine a few Mondays ago, they were quite silent about it. And so in my assessment, they have absolutely no legitimate basis to make a claim that the world should support the TFG. But the Somali people and their government should be supported, in my estimation.
Intriguing that even with regards to stealing food aid, even the UN World Food Programme is conducting an investigation into possible theft from people that worked with them in distributing some of that aid for Somalia. Abdi Ismail Samatar, thank you very much for joining us on the stream. Good to have you with us. Good to hear your thoughts on a broad range of issues related to Somalia. It's a turbulent time, and we hope next time we speak to you, Somalia is a little bit better off. We can only hope and dream.
We will pray.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Abdi Ismail Samatar, joining us there via Skype. Arij, good to have you on the stream.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you come back in the not too distant future. As always, Ahmed, I'll see you tomorrow. Just remind our viewers as to what we're talking about tomorrow.
Tomorrow, you might need to remind me. What are we talking about tomorrow?
I think we're talking
of
healthcare
course.
in the UK.
Yes, the UK. Atos. Yes, pulling people off the web. Well,
Right. Yeah. Okay. We'll get you briefed up on
yes,
it. and then
clearly I'm very, very prepared for this show, not so prepared for tomorrow.
Apologies for catching Ahmed cold there, but thanks a lot for everything, Ahmed and Arij and Wadab before that, and Abdi as well. Intriguing discussion. We hope you were absorbed by it. I was as well. We hope you join us tomorrow as well. Bye-bye.